the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Dallas Cowboys. What do they have in common in this episode? I'll talk about that on the other side. Cool Sports presents on the Daily. Well, how are you, VIP? I'm glad that you are back watching this channel. Cole Johnson's on the mic and live in the living color on the Daily on Tap, presented by Gold Sports. And VIP, if you haven't done so already, what are you waiting for? Subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you can be up to date on all things Cole Sports and all things in the world of sports as we give you videos every Monday through Friday. So you'll be up to date and you'll be in the know, whether it is with your family, in church, at work, or wherever you congregate amongst people. Well, it's Thursday, and I always love history, and I always love the Throwback Thursday element of this show. And we're getting to the time period where I can pick and choose interesting time periods. And in this case, yeah, the AFC and the NFC Championship games following the 1978 season is the perfect way to January 7th, 1979. I'll set the stage for you. So you had the season before and the season before it, 1976, 1977. It was marred would be a very callous way of saying this. It was dominated by a lot of defenses that physically inserted their will onto opposing offenses. And many in the Shield office were thinking, this game is sort of not quite flowing the way it should. You know, almost like latter part and latter day, like how people were thinking about the NBA. You know, back in the 90s, it was all about defense, but they opened the game up a little bit more the next decade. Similar thought processes were going on in the 70s with the NFL. They were thinking, well, we need to open the game up. Somehow, some way, we need to open this up because, you know, we can't have these teams just maul players. And then you get to the two probably most dominant defenses of that era, which would be the Steel Curtain. And I'll mention them a little more a little later. They weren't considered dirty, but they had their moments. They had their moments of being dirty. And then there were the bad boys at NFL who they didn't care if you thought they were dirty. They would just simply rub your face in it for real. And that'd be the Oakland Raiders. I mean, when you had hard hitters like Jack Tatum, who earlier in the 1978 season paralyzed a wide receiver, that pretty much was a clue as to, okay, I think we need to tone down the physicality from the defense, basically asserting its will on offenses. So in the 1977 offseason, in the early part of 1978, you had brain trusts such as the late Colts and Dolphins head coach Don Shula say, all right, let's open this game up a little more. And the big time rule that aided in the opening up of the game was considered the de-emphasis of the bump and run, or what has been affectionately termed back in Pittsburgh as the Mel Blount rule, which would mean that you saw receivers go down the field, and it is like what the definition bump and run is. You check a receiver with a bump and you run with them. And then to curtail their route running, you give them another bump and another bump and another bump until the ball either comes in your direction or you intercept it. So Shula came up with a rule, and heck, I'll even quote it. He said, quote, a defense will be penalized if after 5 yards they bump a receiver, but we will give a defensive back or a cornerback or a safety one hit or one chuck, one type of bump within the first 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. Other than that, if they make contact with the receiver, it is called a holding penalty or a pass interference call. Close quote. So what does that do? Well, it did open up the offenses. And in particular, it helped out the Steelers offense. Now, mind you, you had number 12, Terry Bradshaw, the back, under center. And he was serviceable. He wasn't great. He didn't wow your socks off. He didn't really do much of anything. He would make up a play or two, but until 1978, the Steelers were basically a team that was dominated by defense. L.C. Greenwood, Joe Green, Jack Lambert, Jack Ham, Mel Blount, Art Shell. Donnie Shell, I'm sorry. They were just littered with defensive talent, just oozing all over the field for them. And so, you had your pieces on offense. You had your Lynn Swans. You had your John Stallworth. You had your Franco Harris, even then Rocky Blyer. But that team was built on defensive dominance. And so because of it, they basically said to Bradshaw, just don't screw this up. Take care of the ball. And sometimes he had a lot of problems taking care of the ball. and it seemed as if defenses figured them out, because after their two Super Bowl victories, and after the 75 and 74 and 75 seasons, the 76 season and the 77 season, the offense struggled. The defense, especially in 1976, awesome. 4 shutouts in that year. And just think of the 2000 Ravens. That is the 1976 Steelers defense. They were absolutely awesome. But they were still scoring points at a pedestrian pace. And Bradshaw was still turning the ball over. And the offense was still having issues asserting its will and dominance on teams. To the point where the lack of offense took them out in the AFC Championship Game in the 1976 season by the Raiders to the tune of 24-7. The very next year, the Steelers make it back to the playoffs, but they only get to the divisional round where they met up with another AFC West team. This time it was the Broncos. And the Broncos defeated them 34-21. The offense was starting to get going, but it still was not quite clicking. It still did connect. And you had these dynamic receivers on both sides of the ball. And you had Franco Harris who pound you yards. But doggone it, that quarterback just simply could not do what he was supposed to do. Then the bump and run being de-emphasized, and Bradshaw looked like a totally different quarterback in 1978. And so they had a wonderful year, leading all the way to the AFC Championship Game against the upstart, ragtag, underdog, lovable, love your blue era Houston Oilers. And the Oilers earlier that year actually beat the Steelers in Pittsburgh. So this was billed as this team could possibly be the one that could unseat the Steelers as the power in the AFC. Not so fast because, well, that game was won before kickoff because it was wet, it was slick, it was icy, and it was slippery. Now, if you know anybody that comes from Houston, I do because I grew up there. Wet, slick, slippery, and cold conditions do not favor Houstonians. And it didn't favor the Oilers there because in that game, they turned the ball over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9 times. And they only had a field goal and a safety to show for it. The final score was 34-5. I mean, the Steelers just asserted their will and dominated the Oilers that day. No choice, no chance. And Franco Harris could do whatever he wanted to do against the Oilers defense. They couldn't stop him. And Pastorini, Dan Pastorini on the other side, couldn't do anything. And they held Earl Campbell to next to nil for yardage. That was the uninteresting AFC Championship game. The NFC Championship game came with the defending champion Dallas Cowboys going to LA to meet up with the Los Angeles Rams. Thank God we can still say that now. Now, the Cowboys were the darlings of the NFC. I mean, after all, they went to 4 Super Bowls before, and I mentioned they were the defending Super Bowl champions that year. Lost to Super Bowl V, won Super Bowl VI, lost Super Bowl X, and then redeemed themselves in Super Bowl XII. So you had Captain Comeback, of course, and you had the dynamic running back of Tony Dorsett. And you had other parts, Butch Johnson and Tony Hill, and of course, Drew Pearson. And then you had your Doomsday Defense on the other side of the ball, led by Ed Chital Jones and Randy White. So you had a team that was full of talent all over the place, going up against a Rams squad that was, how can I say this? They were sort of like, I guess you could say, the NFL 1970s version of the 90s Braves. They were good enough to win divisional crowns, but they just simply could not make it to the Super Bowl. So, I mean, they turned over quarterback after quarterback after quarterback, and it just didn't happen. Same thing here, because the very next year, the Rams did go to the Super Bowl with another quarterback in Vince Ferragamo. But the Rams couldn't get started on offense, and they simply couldn't stop the defense. I mean, they couldn't stop the Dallas Cowboys offense on defense. And the final score of that game was 28-0. So America actually was happy that they were seeing the two darlings of the league match up for Super Bowl XIII. And it was, to me, one of, if not the best Super Bowl that's ever been played. But you would have been thinking, oh God, we're probably going to end up having another snooze fest and a blowout, because the AFC and NFC championship games were both. You had one game that was a 28-point margin, the other 29. So you had two dominant teams. They both were the unquestioned best teams in their conference. And there was a smidge of bad blood between the two teams. And so that was a great matchup. And we saw why both teams we saw why people salivated over both teams making it that far. On this date in 1979, as the Steelers beat the Oilers 34-5 in the AFC Championship game, and the Cowboys on the road shut out the Rams in LA 28-0, setting up the epic Super Bowl XIII. Now, if you want this shirt that you see right before your very eyes, The description box below has all the details as to how to get it and where you can get it. And tell me, in the 1978 season leading up to the AFC and NFC Championship games, what were some of the greatest moments that you can remember or recall for the Cowboys and the Steelers that year? Like this video and share it throughout your social media. Comment below because I love to hear what you have to say, VIP. It is beautiful to hear your comments. Don't forget, hit the notification bell and subscribe to this channel for any and all content that emanates from here. That's all the time I have. Thank you so much, VIP. I do this for you. For all of us here at Cold Sports, this has been yet another installment of Cold Sports on the visual and on the daily.